It's almost impossible to utilize a collection, museum collection, without knowing its makeup. There has to be some sort of a system that replaces recipe cards and octogenarian memories. Once the relationships that exist only in memory are gone, the system fails. Only a redundant system that allows links between elements will do. To find all of the information about a topic, the system must be able to look everywhere within all of the records for relevance. Once this has been accomplished, the collection could be evaluated, valued, and utilized. Information requests could be handled immediately. Reports can be generated, loans and exhibits can be tracked. Special handling and restriction information is forefront. Genealogy information requests are instantly presented along with any other elements that exist in records. And in most situations, online access can be offered. A properly built and maintained collection management system is the heart of any modern museum. Sorry, that's the recipe card thing there. I was too busy reading and I forgot I got to do this other thing too. This is kind of where we're coming from. A properly built and maintained collection management system is the heart of any modern museum, and in conjunction with other digital resources, supports the mandates established in the digital strategy, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. The point in time where I joined the Museum Society coincided with a terrible realization that the digital records of their collections management system had been lost. They had been sporadically working at building a past perfect database for several years, strictly through the efforts of volunteers. Unfortunately, the Society Board did not have a digital strategy in place and did not have sufficient technical knowledge on staff to protect the resource. The Society employed a cloud backup service, but did not know that the images were overwritten every 60 days. Replacement of a hard drive caused the loss of data, and the error was not resolved in time it was not discovered in time to recover. A new attempt at a past perfect database was started, and about 500 partial records were created. The reality was that the software was antiquated and it was difficult to learn. Clearly, a new solution was required. A local vendor was approached, but the system was vastly too expensive for a small museum. When I attended the BC Museums Association annual conference in October of 2019 in Prince George, there were two CMS vendors offering their wares. The first was the previously mentioned local vendor, and the second was selling an optional a la carte system which could be tailored for small museums. Obviously, this is it here, Proficio Elements by the Rediscovery Software Company. Our initial buy-in was under $3,000, including conversion of our past perfect database and a new computer to run the system. Elements indicates that this is a stripped down version of the full-on Proficio software deployment that costs a whole lot more. However, in 3 years of using the system, we have not missed any of the so-called extras. Our deployment includes 5 modules: history, which is where the artifacts are kept; library, which is obviously books; natural history, rocks and fossils; art, and a hierarchical archive system, which takes care of photos, maps, audio, video, documents, journals, ephemera, digital items, etc. The system has many tables that can be populated. These can be set to crossover modules. So the modules are customized to their purposes, not only with appropriate fields, but also with lexicons and taxonomic resources like nomenclature for. Proficio Elements also supports MARC record input, which of course has to do with the library books. The interface is very similar to Windows users, is familiar to Windows users and is very flexible. Left-hand sidebars for navigation. The upper pane is a list of records under scrutiny, and the lower pane is the current record. Function buttons on the top ribbons change depending upon the module and the user. There is a global search tool that accesses the database as directed and will report all instances of requested keywords regardless of which module they are in. The Princeton Museum was opened 65 years ago in the centennial year of 1958. It started with 3 ladies, some borrowed land, an old log building, and lots of help. Initially, the museum was in a log cabin, but now we have a log cabin in the museum. The committee collected some items, borrowed lots more, and opened to the flocks of visitors that were traveling the province in that special summer. Then by 1965, the situation had stabilized enough to take the first proper inventory. The first records were written in journals. I would guess that there would be at least 6,000 recipe cards ultimately that resulted from those initial inventory attempts. Before the inventory project began in 2019, so that would actually be the big red start over button and an attempt to do the past perfect thing again. There was no real quantification of the collection, only guesses. Do we now know that we have at least 4,762 artifacts, 3,750 photographs, 823 maps, 4,755 mini biographies, 631 obituaries, 384 donors, 3,951 fossils in the database already, lots more as well. 194 books so far, Stella's working on that. 1,321 archival containers, which is either a folder in a filing cabinet or a box that's on a shelf. And that has appeared very recently. One of our young volunteers has begun to quantify what's there. And in a 2-week period, she added something like 25,000 keywords to the system. Searchable entities that we didn't have 2 weeks before. We've got 88 pieces of art, 40 videos, 125 oral histories, 350 stone tools, and so over 23,000 formal records so far, and that's expanding every day. Being able to access the collection records with more, Easily is an obvious benefit to the inventory process. The secondary benefit is that everything in the collection is observed and being handled. This increases the awareness of the contents and their significance. Knowing what we have means that we can share the information more easily, and this conforms directly to the museum's mission and vision plans. The first numbering system for identifying objects included a prefix indicating a category. Some of these prefixes were P for pioneer, W for women, I for Indian, etc. The remainder of the item identifier would be the year of donation or inventory, followed by the accession number and the item number. Except for the prefix, the system for the artifact numbering, and this is artifacts, remains more or less the same. We've obviously, the prefix was unacceptable. There are several other combinations of identifiers in other modules, and we do use prefixes in some cases to indicate exhibition, incoming loan, outgoing loan. All of those things are tracked in the system. Accessions are identified as 2023.99, and then there would be an item number following that. Entering a new tripartite entry into the history module will infill the accession field with the first two parts and associate the item with the accession. The way we have it set up, an accession can be linked to many items regardless of which module they're in. So the accession is the file box that comes in the door, and it could have ephemera, shoes, you name it, and everything can be associated with the accession. So the importance of creating records, the process of creating records varies depending upon the module. As previously mentioned, the fields and the functionality vary. Therefore, the library module is structured to support books. As an example, the preferred method of creating new records for the library module is through the importation of existing MARC records. So those records can be accessed from UBC is the best source, and the Library of Congress as well. And if you can find a MARC record for a book you're trying to create a record for, that MARC record infills the entire record. It's very efficient. The ARP module, for instance, contains fields to indicate whether or not something is framed, glazed, which school it belongs to, the artist, etc. All item records can have attached images, and other multimedia resources, whatever they may be, can be linked to the record. We endeavor to keep any downloaded file small and will link out to large files so as to keep the collections management system computer very lean and efficient and not burden it with massive files. All the massive files are external. The history module, which is where we keep our artifacts, interacts with the nomenclature for lexicon for museums. This is an attempt to standardize the naming of artifacts between institutions. This lexicon is somewhat limited, but works for the majority of items. Again, when a choice is made from the list of names, the remaining fields self-populate. In all records throughout the CMS, keywords are the most important items to include. The search engine is the most important tool. The natural history module interacts with external taxonomical resources to assist in categorizing the objects. And that resource changes depending upon whether the object belongs to the paleontology, the biology, or the geology sub-modules. The external resources will change. Again, at the end, it will help you infill all of the various levels of categorizing that particular object. The archives module is the most flexible and useful of all, but it also takes the most planning. The archive module is hierarchical and split into 4 layers: collection, series, file, and item. Each layer can have sub-layers as well to make it really complicated. We don't do that. The organization of this layered hierarchy is liable to differ greatly depending upon the institution. I have found no useful templates suggesting a typical structure for a small museum. However, on this issue, I consulted artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence makes the following suggestion, and I think if you analyze it, it's not too bad. Remembering, of course, it is absolutely general. So one of the biggest problems in creating an efficient collection management system is the complexity of the English language. In the same way that the nomenclature lexicon constrains language variations by limiting choices, decisions should be made regarding descriptive words. One example we've had some trouble with, and really came to our attention, is railroad and railway. We've got maybe even thousands of instances of that within our database, but certainly hundreds. And you don't know whether, let's say, a photograph, if you're searching for it, will be found using one word or the other. So you have to use rail with the wild card. Everybody that's using the system needs to know that. The only way around that is if you make very intelligent choices right up front that says, hey, we're only going to use one of these words. But that's incredibly difficult to try and figure out. So you need to know how to use the system to make sure you're getting accurate results. And indeed, the second example there is the idea of a physical location. So this was another problem that we ran into, was that one module, the history module, has a wonderful pop-up situation when you're recording the location of an article, and it gives you room. It gives you room, I guess is the first one. Well, building, actually, then room, then rack, then shelf, then box. Great. However, the other modules don't do that for some reason, especially when it comes to the hierarchical archival module. It provides for a container instead of a location, and you have a choice. You can have the container at the top level and allow it to flow down through. So we're talking collections, series, file unit, and ultimately to the item, or not. And we choose to do the latter. We insert the location manually at the item level. So now you have to be extremely careful that you have continuity throughout the system, because as indicated here, those two things will not produce the same results. You have to have standards that are going to work, and you also have to be diligent to make sure people are following them. Proficio Elements does not require a particularly powerful computer to run. However, we have worked hard to keep our installation lean. Although our database is getting larger, the users report very little latency, despite the fact that they are inputting via remote nodes. We have 6 workstations accessing 3 virtual seats. So you can only have 3 simultaneous users in our application. We have had about 20 different users so far, and we have also allowed records to be created via remote access. But we will never allow the public access to this collections management system. Instead, we've decided to implement a separate server which will be used to interface with the world. So thereby creating another layer of protection for the collections management system and its database. The supplier has always been willing to provide support on every level, whether it's functional questions or technical procedures. Updates are not frequent and are easily installed. It's interesting to note that the same software update procedure is also utilized for mass input of some multimedia resources. And we have successfully input masses of metadata in our own creation. The entire 3,750 item paleontology information set was uploaded to the collections management system in one command. The techniques utilized to do that are similar. They're not specific to Proficio. Those same techniques and those same templates of files will be used to populate the new server. The language and the procedure is the same. We initially contracted with the supplier to migrate the data from the previous past perfect database into Proficio. We should have learned how to do this then, because we had to learn how to do it later anyway. We started with 2 summer students working together in the history module to catalog the artifacts, knowing that they would have trouble with the antique items. We steered them into the clothing section first and set them about measuring, photographing, recording, and then properly storing the clothing collection. I created about 1,200 records of somewhat dubious accuracy. These efforts were followed up by a dedicated volunteer who tidied up and then finished the clothing collection before moving on to other aspects of the physical artifacts. And that person was one of the first to secure a contract to do data input. Yeah, here we go. The next contract employee, Stella, went on to the cartographic collection and processed nearly 850 records, maps. This was our first use of the archive module, and it was a big challenge to determine how to organize these records. It had maps of all kinds of topics, sizes, locations, and ages. And how do you create a universal quantifier? We used GeoGratis. GeoGratis is a free resource of the Government of Canada which provides geospatial information. Their interactive online map will allow you to zoom to a 1 to 50,000 level anywhere in Canada and read the location indicated. Therefore, we decided to name our maps based upon their national topographical system survey grid number with qualifiers after. We decided to have another summer student input the data from about 3,000 recipe cards, which made up a biographical study. When that was done, we had her go through all of our main history books and input every name and the page of which book into this table. This is our eminent figure table. After having removed the duplicates, we have biographical records on 4,750 Princetonians and have records of where their stories can be found within these other history books. Throughout all types of entries, keywords must be considered to support the global search engine. The photography portion of the project has been very challenging, with many volunteers succumbing, and each one of them has left their mark. Recently, we have made great progress on this task, and we now have 3,750 digitized photos in very high definition. They're all scanned at 1200 DPI. The files are absolutely massive. That is why they're on a separate server. We also take smaller JPEG thumbnails to associate with the record in the CMS so that you can see. And that's actually the quickest way to go through it, is visually go through the database. Our numbering system for the photos is very complex, as it consists of acronyms 3 or 4 layers deep. An outside contractor digitized the first photos and published them online starting back in about 2013, and that established a system. Several series of photos have been published on the ARCA site, which is Digitized Okanagan History, BC Regional Digital History, with the items being identified by a prefix, PRIN for Princeton, and a batch number followed by a file and item numbers. Photos that have not been published to ARCA are held in a different collection so that we know what we have published and what we haven't. And they have a different numbering system, which makes it immediately apparent. All previous numbers that are found on any object, whether it's a piece of paper, whether it's a photograph, or whether it's a physical artifact, are recorded on the records so that we don't have to go through, even though we don't use that numbering system anymore, we don't have to go through and put new numbers on everything. We pick it up, whatever the number is, you put it in a search engine, it'll find it. Oral history recordings have been transferred off of their original analog media and digitized. These resources, being fairly large in nature, are stored on the network accessible storage unit and linked in records. The same goes for other audio video resources and the photographs. So this is what a Windows Explorer window looks like when you pull it up on one of our workstations. And on the left-hand side, you can see down the bottom that there are shares on the network accessible server that work just like another hard drive. It doesn't matter which workstation you're using, anywhere in the system, you have access to those just as if there were a hard drive installed on your local computer.
Todd,
Yes.
what kinds of audio formats were you working? The originals, you had what, cassettes?
Yeah.
Reel?
Well, we didn't have any reel-to-reel stuff yet,
Yes.
although we may have some stashed. Cassettes, audio cassettes, horrible recordings. There was a gentleman who clearly would go to the auxiliary and buy whatever sort of cassette recorder he could find and whatever used tapes, just terrible equipment. The recordings are absolutely horrible. The information is there.
Yeah.
The information is there. The voices of those people are preserved, even though they're all gone. And now that it's digitized, we're able to improve it a little bit with the Audacity software. We can actually get rid of some of the noise, definitely improve it. And they're at the point now where they can be transcribed. We've been looking at different transcription services, and it's a very quick and easy process to transcribe the audio once it's been improved a little bit. So that's another project that's ongoing.
And for people searching that stuff, will they be able to listen to the audio or more likely access it by a transcript or?
Either way, just as easily.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. There's no the decisions about those sorts of things, especially considering that we're intending to put a server online here within the year. The decisions will have to be made by the board as to which resources are made publicly accessible. So those are decisions that have yet to be made, but technically there's no limitations.
And excuse my ignorance, but in terms of servers, those are remote, are they, or you don't have servers locally?
We are going to establish a physical server.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're going to establish a physical server, and that gives us 100% control. We're paying for cloud services, and we can control 100% what happens with our data. Okay. All right, so yeah, on the network accessible storage unit, all of our CDs, DVDs, tapes, like VHS tapes, cassettes, flash drives, and any other media that we found, they've all been copied or converted, whatever, and they all now reside on the network accessible storage. The network accessible storage is actually a simple little thing. It's just 2 hard drives in a little box. So it's really not very big. It's just this big. It sits in the office, but it's got a massive storage capability. And it's redundant. Not only is it redundant because there's 2, I think I might be getting ahead of myself here, but I'll do it anyway. The network accessible storage, the drives in there are mirrored, and we have a spare drive in a box. If one of them fails, brand new one goes right in. And it is backed up by 2 other portable hard drives, which are in separate locations. We're not relying on the cloud. We're not relying on anyone else to preserve our data. Oh no, that's right there. Actually, I was right on time with that. That's good. With so many different users on the system and a growing database, standardization becomes even more important. So decisions have to be made about the composition of object numbers, locations, and the various uses of the fields. I touched on those other items earlier, but the uses of the fields is another thing. User fields can be renamed, and we chose to do this for donor and location in the archive module because those fields didn't exist there. The archive module has a container option, which I talked about before. The manual for the software is very large, but it's also very helpful. I had a problem a few weeks ago, a little minor issue, and I conversed with the supplier, and they very kindly answered my questions, and they held off with telling me all of that information is in the manual if you chose to read it. I was thankful. The supplier also has a large collection of video tutorials. This is page one of, I think, 5 pages, and each one of these is 30, 45 minutes. And they're, believe it or not, even more boring than this presentation right now.
Well, it's crucial, Todd, because if you fall under a bus,
Yeah,
who replaces you? You
Yeah.
talked about the use of historical memory, that when the
Right.
old folk die and
Yeah.
take their knowledge with them, the same
Yeah.
situation is here.
now, the
Who
thing,
else understands this system as well as you do?
believe me, people are coming along very nicely on the system.
Yeah.
Even Marjorie, I shouldn't say it that way. But anyone who chooses to get involved with the system will start to pick it up fairly soon. And that is kind of the whole idea about why we're doing this, is that, yeah, eventually I'm going to fall by the wayside, but this ain't going nowhere.
And this is a good introduction.
Yes, they are. The tutorials very definitely are very useful. Yeah.
That's
Just
something
brutally
you know,
boring.
You get extensive support from Pro-Facil?
Yes, we pay a significant amount of money, but it's reasonable. It's significant, but it's not out of line.
You said 3,000 a year?
No, oh heavens, no, nowhere near that. I think it's somewhere like 700 a year we're paying, and that gives any software updates and any technical or all the support we need anytime.
So what's the initial buy-in?
It started off at about $3,000.
Yeah.
And like I said, that actually, and so I think the Proficio part of that was like $1,500.
Okay.
But then you've got the computer. We paid them to convert our old Perfect database and install it, and a bunch of other stuff.
Transition nicely?
It was a little bumpy, but
Yeah.
it was okay. And then, without getting into too many details, it didn't really take us very long to get up to speed with it. It is a long learning process, though.
Yes.
It's a
I've been
complicated,
there.
yeah, it's a fairly complicated system, but the young folks the younger folks, the university kids that we've had working for us lately, they just take to it like a duck to water.
Yes.
That's like, there's no training time. They just dive in the pool and start working. Because it's so familiar, the interface and how it works, it's all very intuitive to someone who is a modern computer user. And that's a good thing. Where am I? Data inconsistencies limit the effectiveness of the list and search functions and make it difficult to find all pertinent records. It should be noted that in any numbering field, the period is recommended as a separator. Other special characters are used other places in the system, and they should be avoided. Things like slashes and dashes and whatnot can have meaning in some other situations, so little things like that are actually quite important. The key to ensuring consistency in the records is through the diligent use of the My List View function. You're going to see that. This allows you to view various columns in the list pane. In other words, you have the navigation pane, you have a record pane, and then you have this list pane. You can make the panes bigger or smaller. If you're analyzing data, you can make the list pane fairly large. And then, depending upon which module you're in, you can pick which columns of information you want to see. And you can go through hundreds and hundreds of records visually, very quickly, looking for a character that's out of place, missing characters, a blank field, whatever it is, and very efficiently analyze a block of data based upon that. You can also filter it in any way you can imagine. What date it was put in, who put it in, what all of those things are very simple filters. So it's really, it makes it fairly easy to improve the data after the fact through diligent use of the tools. Let me address some of the challenges and solutions that we've encountered. First, the challenges. Cursive writing.
Now unknown.
Yeah, I guess as a modern parent, if you wanted to hide something from your kids, write it in cursive. Because I get that all the time.
Yeah.
What is this? And for the most part, the university students are very bright. They can handle most of it, but I mean, the letters, postcards are written, fairly quickly, and that could be a real challenge. Outdated technology, some of those old flash drives that were specific to a camera or a gigantic Wang floppy disk or whatever. I mean. What are you going to do with that? That's a major problem. Guidance. In the case of a society like us, understanding enough about the technologies to make good decisions for the future. It's quite a challenge because not everybody's up on technology. It's changing so fast. It's hard for anyone actually to think about the future and make good decisions. Burnout. Data entry can be very boring after an extended period. It's good to be able to change it up a little bit to make it more interesting or to give a break from just the monotony of doing the same thing over and over and over and over. And I got to mention this. Right now, we are digitizing George and Dawn's newspaper. And so that's, George, help me out. What was the quantity?
940 issues, thereabouts.
At 24 to 28 pages per issue.
Yeah.
Whole bunch. And so we have and I will show you a picture of this, a really, really cool, really efficient scanner. And again, we obtained grant money to do this. We put it out there looking for someone to do the work. We found someone that we actually were familiar with and decided that this gentleman would be our selection to do the work. And then the very last thing, after he agreed to do it, a few days later, I emailed him back and I said, "Are you really sure? Because this is about as repetitive as it can get, digitizing a newspaper." So he knew what he was getting into. And he is doing between 400 and 500 pages a day. and loving it because it's not boring. Wow, these are really interesting stories. I didn't know that. Oh, this is really cool. Hey, so that's very boring and very interesting all at the same time.
Oh, newspapers are full of rabbit holes.
Yeah, for sure. Freedom to make decisions. Almost daily, exceptions are found that need a decision made. So that's my job. But that is really tricky because not all of those decisions have been the best. And so it's been a learning process, and you can't begin to imagine all the little things that are going to come up. And of course, the biggest one is incomplete records. Garbage in, garbage out. I mean, you can only do so much with very, very limited information. It's always a challenge, and it's very frustrating that in the past they didn't take more time to create the data and protect the data. Solutions. Number one, cooperation. Allowing for one managing force with guidance from the board. So the board has to make the big decisions about which way we're going to go with all of these issues, but then there has to be one person that drives the ship. Adequate funding. Consultation. There are important Canadian resources that should be consulted before starting any of this. Canadian Heritage Information Network is a very, very important source. And the Archival Association of British Columbia has a manual for small museums, which has some very good information in it as well. The project began with the first exposure to Proficio elements in Prince George. After receiving a quote from the supplier, our due diligence began, and we consulted the Canadian Heritage Information Network for guidance in the selection and establishment of a new system. Proficio was not one of the systems that they had evaluated, but it compared well with all of the systems that they had evaluated up to that time. We looked at what other museums are doing and tried to establish a direction. The Museum Assistance Program in the Canadian Heritage Department of the GOC provided the funding to purchase the host hardware and software, and by August of 2020, we were beginning to input data. The speed with which we were able to populate our database was largely dictated by circumstance. The COVID pandemic was in full swing by this time, and volunteers went to ground. Being a small museum in a small town worked out well for us. We developed a protocol that allowed us to stay open, except for those times when the town closed all the municipal buildings. But during this period, we were able to access and reallocate to some degree funds, which allowed us to hire contract workers to do the data input. And we also allowed some remote data input. A few volunteers persevered and worked alone. We were able to hire summer students initially, and although mature students and adults proved superior to the high school age students, we ultimately offered flexible hours and raised the hourly rate we paid, and then were able to secure good workers. If we relied upon high school students and older volunteers alone, this project would have taken many more years than it has. We had the good fortune to hire some university students that had fantastic computer skills and organizational skills that allowed them to produce at a vastly quicker pace. In some cases, the progress has been stunning. We did not have a comprehensive digital strategy when we began, but have developed one since. And by the way, I have all these documents here, if anyone's interested in looking through these documents. The the digital strategy has been developed since. This philosophy statement has risen in importance in the last 3 years and is now required for certain funding streams. The digital strategy document talks mostly about the philosophy of the organization and how it interacts with the digital world, not just the collections management system, but the internal resources within the museum. What forms are things stored in? There are recommendations. For instance, Microsoft's files are not acceptable. Docs and all the rest. The Excel files are acceptable, but otherwise, PDFs are acceptable. JPEGs are acceptable. But how many times has Microsoft changed? And we got caught in that trap too. We found an old Microsoft database, and I had to find a tool to translate it, and it turned out to be the cemetery records. Kind of important. Not that we have the only copy of that. But one very important aspect of the digital strategy is the establishment of routines to back up data and perform other maintenance tasks. Storage methods and locations are defined, and this is referred to as digital asset management. If the establishment of the digital strategy precedes the cataloging project, specifics regarding the project could be included. We talked about all manner of different things that could be decided ahead of time if you were able. We prepared a document for one grant application that detailed each step in the digitization of our collection. Organizations should strongly consider developing a digital strategy to bring all of these concerns to the directors and encourage them to understand and form an opinion on the issues. Our digital strategy took about 6 months of consideration and consultation to develop. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it has not caused us serious harm to allow quantity over quality in some cases. Obviously, that's a qualified statement, but the gamble has paid off. Again, we had the good fortune to enlist university students several times. And they have the computer savvy to very quickly compare data to improve quality issues. There's no excuse for poor supervision over data input quality, but we don't always recognize the mistakes that are being made. The eminent figure table was a good example. Many duplications were created because of the process we used. But it took very little time by a dedicated volunteer to fix it. And the result was several name-indexed local history books on top of that massive recipe card collection. These books were later digitized and exist on our network accessible storage so that all of our local history books can instantly be accessed on any one of those workstations, and a search can be utilized. As a matter of fact, I'll take it one step further. They all exist within the same folder, and so by opening up Adobe Acrobat in its advanced search mode, you can put in a keyword and search every one of those history books with one command. And it will come back and give you a list of everything that's relevant. Now, we're not distributing those. That's strictly an in-house resource. We do not have copyrights to those books, so we're not distributing those digitized files. But it improves our performance dramatically. The establishment of the eminent figure table was probably the first significant milestone in the process, and it really improved our deliverables, if you will. It took about 11 months to create that table of more than 4,700 biographies, but we figured that was important because it would be one of those things that would connect with virtually everything else. You know, that pair of shoes belonged to that guy. Well, we've already got a record on that guy, so that makes it easy. One of the most important advances in the project was the purchase of the Caesar gooseneck scanner. It's this guy here. That's the scanner. Our operators, no, that's Neil. He's got a name. He's producing over 400 pages a day with relative ease. The thing's got a foot pedal. It's got a button down on the floor. So he just, there's a piece of glass that he's using, open, flip, push a button, open, flip, push a button. At the end of one 28-page newspaper, he gives it a chance to go through and do optical character recognition on all 24 or 28 pages, and then convert it to searchable PDF. And then that is put onto the network accessible storage, and he moves to the next paper.
Does it check your work too? For instance, if you hadn't hit the pedal on one page, will it tell you that you've missed a page?
Nope. No, he has to do that manually. But you get into a routine, you get into a rhythm, and again, it's pretty easy to spot if something's not right. Especially when you're going that quickly, you know, it's a rhythm. Oh, right. Furthermore, the scanner is connected to a brand new computer. It's referred to as a next unit of computing. That's the computer. And it is more powerful than the big desktop that I've got sitting beside my desk, and it costs just a little over $200. Comes complete with Windows 11 Pro and all of the same connectability as a regular computer. It's all solid state, and it just works like a charm. So, and these things, that's a relatively low end for this. I mean, you can pay $1,500 for one of these things if you want to, and everything in between. But this is, again, another advancement. This is where the technology is going. We don't have to have a big box anymore. This thing comes with a bracket to attach it to the back of the monitor, so you don't even see it. And it's very powerful.
What's the inputs?
Inputs?
Yeah, would it take sticks?
Oh yeah, it's got a whole bunch of USBs. It's got HDMI, 1 or 2 HDMIs coming out of it. It has it has exactly what you'd expect a desktop or a laptop, for that matter, to have. Sorry, I'm talking about milestones here. Oh yes, the addition of the Caesar scanner and the establishment of this new workstation, that was another milestone, because all of a sudden, this is how we got all our history books digitized. That gigantic, I can't remember, 650 pages in that Princeton R Valley book.
Yeah.
That was the first test, right? And it was done in less than a day.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, that was just
And
incredible.
searchable.
Yeah, fully searchable. Yeah, so another important milestone in the project was the completion of the digitization of John Sandus's 90 audio cassette tapes, oral histories. And I've already mentioned that all the rest of the tapes and all the rest of that are already done. Back to this. Our network consists of 5 workstations, 3 printers, 2 scanners, 2 task-dedicated computers. That's one of them. The Caesar's one of them. The network accessible storage, and of course, a 55-inch television in the main gallery, which is connected into the network, and therefore, whatever resources are on the network accessible storage that the television can play, it has access to. So photographs, movies, everything that's on the NAS can be brought up. The oral histories, any of the video histories that we have, whatever. The television's connected in on the network, so we can display them anytime. We have eliminated, this is kind of another slightly important thing, everything's hardwired in. We've had a volunteer who's an ex-telephone employee, and he spent quite a bit of time hardwiring all of the resources in so that we're not relying on wireless for any of the production equipment. There is still wireless being utilized, and that is because we have some little tablets distributed around the museum which will react to motion and will play little historical vignettes as you walk by. They are connected wirelessly. Again, I learned early on that the supervisor cannot be complacent thinking that the data is being input accurately. I have to, as a supervisor, be very, very diligent about making sure everybody's doing things correctly. This is what I was talking about earlier about visibly being able to check for anomalies.
The spelling of anomaly.
Oops. Well, there you go. See how easy that was? Okay, and there's all kinds of different reports that this thing can spit out as well, depending upon what you need. There's an inventory sheet. Each one of those is a box that's got a bunch of pairs of shoes in it. So I think for us, the true measure of progress was the rapid increase in our ability to find information. We're able to service our guests' genealogical requests immediately because our search capabilities are so efficient now. So we're still about a year away from completing the cataloging process. Hopefully we'll have the will and resources to then go through the database again and purify it. In the meantime, the next major challenge is the establishment of the web server to deliver the collection directly to the public. This addresses, again, the mission and vision statements of the strategic plan. We recently discovered the new Heritage Burnaby website, which I'm hoping will serve as a template for what we do. We intend to provide good service to our public and avoid spending huge amounts of money doing so. It can be done. Previous experience has shown that an effective collections website can be produced by adapting existing e-commerce technology on an adaptive content management system. It's just like shopping online, except nothing's for sale. So, again, establishing a system like this, I feel it's the only way to properly support a collection in this world today. It allows us to do our job much more efficiently. It allows that data to be protected for the future. That's perhaps the most important part. If you look at what happened in Lillooet, both of their museums perished. Lytton, sorry. Both of their museums perished. But the Chinese museum, their collections management system still exists. And so all of those articles that are perished, there's still representation, there's still photographs, there's still the critical measurements, there's all of the information about where it came from. And that information still exists even though the actual elements have perished. And the collections management system allows us to, again, future uses for the collection. We're going to take information from the collections management system and put it in this new server, but only bits and pieces, whatever it is we want to put in there, right? And who knows what the future holds with regards to how we may choose to use this information in the future. And the future is bright. Successfully implementing the CMS as part of the strategic plan positions the Museum Society for future advances. Recent investments by major funders are allowing us to move online with our deliverables, providing resiliency against further disruptions in the standard business model. Think about Science World when COVID hit. You know, the really hands-on people were in serious trouble. And that's why there's a pivot. There's a pivot now towards going online. There's money available to do this. This is what the government sees as the future for museums, is to broaden and also, you know, protecting. So, the Small Town Museum and its stories will soon be available worldwide. And that's it.
Good.
Thank you. Thank you for not bailing out, and thank you for not falling asleep. Is there any?
Just a question about the CMS.
Sure.
Do you have like deaccessioning and divestment capabilities of it?
Absolutely, absolutely. They're obviously, if you, it does support the whole deaccession process. That process would go through, obviously, a committee,